You know, when we talk about the history of Eastern Europe, Kievan Rus is always this huge central figure. It's the star of the show. But what if we hit rewind? What was happening on the ground before this mighty state even existed? Who were the people actually living there, in the lands of modern-day Ukraine? Well, that's what we're going to dig into.
And believe me, this isn't just some dusty old academic debate. As the historian Serhiy Plokhy lays out here, the story of Kievan Rus is a modern-day battleground. You have different nations, Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, all tracing their roots back to this one medieval state, and each one has a very, very different take on who really owns that legacy. The stakes today are incredibly high.
So to really get to the bottom of it, to cut through all the modern politics, we have to ask a much more basic question. Before all the grand princes, before the stunning cathedrals of Kyiv, before Rus was even a thing, who was actually there? Who were the people on the ground?
To answer that, you've got to start with the land itself, because back in the ancient world, geography wasn't just scenery, it was destiny. It dictated how you lived, what you ate, and the kind of society you built.
And this map just perfectly captures the world we're about to enter. You can see it's not one unified kingdom, not at all. It's a patchwork quilt of different peoples, all spread out across these vast plains. Their highways, their lifelines, were the great rivers that crisscrossed the land. Now, there's a pretty strong consensus among historians that the Slavic homeland, the place where it all started, was this huge swath of territory right here, stretching between the Vistula River in the west and the Dnieper River in the east. We're talking about the lands that are now modern-day Poland, Belarus, and for our story, most importantly, Ukraine.
So, what was the big deal about this region? Why here? Well, it really comes down to one thing: the soil. The land here, especially along the lower Dnipro, is this incredibly rich black earth. It's called Chernozem, and it was a total game changer. It meant you could grow amazing crops, build stable villages, and support a growing population. This fertile ground was literally the foundation for everything that came next.
Okay, so we've got the land, now let's meet the people. And our main guide for this part of the journey is this amazing historical document called the Primary Chronicle. It was written by monks in Kyiv way back in the day, and it gives us a kind of who's who of the tribes living on this landscape.
The Chronicle introduces us to this really diverse cast of characters. You've got the Polanians, the people of the fields, right there in the heartland around what would become Kyiv. Then, just to their west, you have the Devrelians, the people of the forest. And there were others too, like the Severians, the Dragovicians, the Dulebians. The point is, these weren't just random groups. They were distinct peoples, with their own names and their own turf.
And here is where it gets really fascinating. The Primary Chronicle doesn't just give us a list of names. It actually paints this vivid picture of societies that were worlds apart, shaped almost entirely by where they lived. It's like a tale of two completely different societies, living right next door to each other.
The monks who wrote this made a huge point of this. They explicitly say that each of these tribes had its own customs, its own laws, its own traditions. This is so important. We're not looking at a single, unified people just waiting for a king. We're looking at a collection of very distinct cultures.
And you couldn't get a clearer contrast than between the Polanians and their neighbors, the Derevlians. The Polanians, living out in the open fields along that major Dnieper trade route, are described as having mild and peaceful customs. You could imagine they were farmers, traders, more connected to the world. But then you have the Derevlians. Their name literally comes from the word for wood. They live deep in the forests, more isolated, and the Chronicle describes their customs as rough and brutal. Same Slavic heritage, but two totally different ways of life, all because one lived in the fields and the other lived in the forest.
So, let's pull all these pieces together. When we look at this world right before Kievan Rus bursts onto the scene, what do we see? Well, we definitely don't see a single unified nation.
The reality was so much more complex, and frankly, so much more interesting. The foundation of Rus was this vibrant, dynamic mosaic. It was a tapestry woven together from all these different threads. You had the field dwellers, the foresters, the traders, the farmers, each with their own rules, their own traditions, their own everything. It was a world defined by its diversity, not its unity.
And that brings us right back to where we started. When you see just how complicated and varied this world was, it makes you ask a pretty tough question, right? If the very origins, the very roots of a nation are this much of a mosaic, can any single, simple story we tell ourselves today really capture the whole truth?